coming up.
Fear of sex altogether, big time. I think just a total fear of it. I think a total unpreparedness for it when it is time to do that, when you are with someone you're going to marry or you are married. That's something that's just like, now it's this huge, scary, unknown territory that you're just not prepared for.
And probably full of shame, right?
Oh, yeah, probably.
Because, okay, I need to do this to be a good wife, but I've been taught my whole life.
Yeah, I've been taught my whole life that it's dirty and it's impure.
So, yeah, that's wild.
And I think it also, if you were taught that and then you didn't follow all those rules, now you feel, well, now I'm impure. Now you feel like, I feel like it kind of takes away from the grace of God as well. Like, now you feel like, oh, there's no hope for me now, or I feel like the way it was taught was like, I remember somebody giving an example of like your used toothbrush.
Oh, wow.
And now you're going to give your husband this used toothbrush, and it's been used however many times. And gosh, and I think they also would sort of say, like, now you're not going to be able to have basically as good of a marriage, or maybe it's not going to be as strong when you do get married, which I'm not saying that sleeping around has no effect on your future marriage. I think it definitely can and will in some ways. However, I also think that God is a graceful God, and I also think that he can make a beautiful marriage if both parties are committed to him and to each other, no matter what their past is. Welcome back to On the Table. Today, I thought it might be fun to talk about purity culture, and so I brought a purity ring for the table.
Ooh. As we get into it, you're going to have to explain what a purity ring is, but keep going. Yeah,
yeah, we can get into it. So purity culture was something that was very popular when I was young, 90s through early 2000s, and purity rings went along with that for sure. Basically, it was, you would wear a purity ring kind of as a promise to God, I guess, and yourself that you would stay pure until marriage. A
lot of times it was the dads who would give the ring to the daughters.
Yes.
As,
it's kind of weird.
Yeah, asking them to keep themselves pure for their new husband or whatever.
I'm sorry, that's kind of weird, though. That's weird.
I know.
It was a thing.
The whole thing is...
You're just saying that's weird because I gave one to you.
True.
As soon as you even looked at my daughter.
Take this.
So I can see that impurity.
It's radiating.
Oh, wait, I gave you a purity, like a duct tape or something like that. No, I'm just kidding.
It was a chastity belt. So wait, hold on. What's the difference between a purity ring and an abstinence ring? It's the same thing?
I don't know if I've heard of an abstinence ring, but I would assume it's a similar concept. I don't know.
Okay. It's sort of a promise, I guess, of which, by the way, I don't think any of us is saying any of that. Like, if that's what you want to do, you want to promise some sort of a purity promise or make some kind of commitment to each other or God or whatever. There's nothing wrong with that. But
I think it's beautiful.
But there can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, but I think that's what we're here to talk about. I think is, it's your topic, but it's just what are the effects of this of a whole cultural change and some of the things, like you had mentioned a book, right, that kind of came out in that time that was influential as well.
Yeah, so there was a book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye by Josh Harris, I believe, and very popular when I was young, talked about in a lot of church circles. That I honestly don't know if I ever read it personally, but I just know it was very popular and heard stuff about it. But it was the whole purity culture thing, in my mind, some of the main points that I just got from various church groups and things growing up was basically, the main thing obviously was abstaining from sex till marriage, but it also got very, very nitpicky about all sorts of things, even to the point of you shouldn't even hold hands maybe or kiss until you're married. Like your first kiss should be on your wedding day. And, you know, it was very, another side of it was like modesty in the way women dressed. And it was always kind of, most of the responsibility was always put on the women of like, you need to keep yourself pure. You need to make sure you're dressing right. Don't cause men to stumble. If they do, it's kind of your fault because you were dressing a certain way. Your skirt was too short, whatever. And then it was also kind of a like guilt trip that got put on women when, you know, of like, well, now you're tarnished in some way. Like now you're not pure for your future husband if you did something to mess up to make yourself impure, whether that was having sex before marriage or even just, I don't know what, maybe you kissed a boy before you got married. Maybe you didn't end up marrying the boy that was your first kiss. Oh, why? Like, and it kind of became this very big, like, pressure and shaming and kind of a legalistic thing in my mind. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton to unpack there. I think, you know, it's interesting because I think it gets into all of that, like the stuff that people don't. I know there's people in the church that talk about this stuff for sure. I'm not going to say like nobody talks about this stuff, but there's a lot of churches, a lot of, you know, in the actual Sunday services, in the Sunday schools. I know all the churches I ever went to growing up and stuff, like they just didn't talk about this stuff, right? This stuff, again, it was probably part of that same concept of like, well, that would be impure to talk about sexual things in church or whatever else. By the way, if you've got kids listening to this, we probably just... part of the On the Tables, we just want to be able to get into these topics, not in some kind of weird way or gruesome way or something, but we want to just be able to have open discussions because we are Christians, we are seeking God, but we're also people and we're dealing with these issues. And so I'm excited to be able to just have an open discussion about all this stuff and what are the ramifications of, I want to find out more about that. And I know some about it. I didn't read that book either. I know some. I know more from studying another person, and that may have been a precursor to that. I want to say his name was Gothard.
Gothard.
Bill Gothard, maybe, or something like that. Ended up being, very interesting personality. I don't want to slander people on the show or whatever, but you can look him up and draw your own conclusions. But I know he was behind like an entire movement that had all sorts of teachings and pamphlets, and a lot of what came out. And this was, I think it was a precursor because this was probably before you were a teenager. But I think it still exists today, and still probably even after all the things that happened with that, it crossed over into the Duggar family, right? And some of them got mixed up in that, and the whole thing's just gross. When you know, there's a movie about it. You can again, I don't want to get into personal stuff with people. You can go find out all sorts of information about that. The bottom line was, here was a person though that was definitely being deceptive about issues of purity and doing exactly what you were saying. It's all about the women and how they handle themselves, and come to find out the men involved with a lot of that movement going on in that time were like they always, not always, but a lot of times in history, the men just get away with being kind of perverts. And they almost use this idea of like putting that pressure on the women to, you know, to almost have an excuse for them or whatever else. I don't know. That's too light of a coverage of it. But yeah. But anyway, I just I'm excited to get in here and talk about that kind of stuff. So
can we start maybe defining what pure is?
What they meant by it or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the main topic as far as the purity thing had to do with sex, like not having sex before marriage. Keeping yourself pure in that sense. But like I was saying, that I feel like that also creeped into other things besides just sex. Like it got very nitpicky to where you felt like you weren't pure even if you were just, I don't know. Like,
sure.
Yeah,
even if you thought a guy was
having sexual thoughts or having, you know, it was like very strict, very, you know, the whole I kissed dating goodbye thing I think was like, you shouldn't be dating.
You should be courting.
It should be like, I think a lot of people said like, oh, you should have like a chaperone when you go on I guess they wouldn't call it a date, but whatever they called it.
Yeah.
When you met with your person you were wanting to get to know for the purpose of seeing if you wanted to marry them.
And that was what the definition is. If you're courting, that it was definitely for the purpose of eventually getting married. It wasn't just willy-nilly, like we just wanted to spend time together.
Yeah. for sure. And obviously there's parts of this that I personally agree with. I mean, I think on a personal level, I do feel like you should be dating in order to find the person you want to marry. And I think it can cause all sorts of consequences for you and the person you're dating to just not be taking it seriously and just be playing around and playing with people's heartstrings. And I don't think it's like the whole movement overall is just all bad or something.
Sure,
I just think
yeah.
that there has been potentially some side effects of it that maybe weren't so great. So
I like where Mike started asking about the what do you mean by purity, or what did they mean, or let's define that, or something else. What I think is fascinating about it is your answer, and I think it's very accurate, was primarily they're talking about sex before marriage, and then but what's interesting about equating sexual thought, you guys both said too. I know when we studied some of that stuff about the Gothard stuff, that a lot of it was about what you're thinking and purifying your thoughts and stuff like that. And I think that goes way beyond. By the way, this isn't anything super new. I think this has existed in the Christian culture for centuries, right? And impure thoughts and all those other things. But think about the language and what that's doing to young people. What they're saying is that a natural thing that God gave you, a natural attraction to the opposite sex, and to the concept of sexual intimacy with a partner, with your spouse, we would all hope that's the ultimate. None of us are against the idea and think you could just go out and have relations with everybody. We're not saying that, but the act itself is a very beautiful thing. It's a gift from God. It's not an impure thing at all, right? In a sense, but if you're taught at a young age or as an adolescent that even the thought of it, everything about it is just dirty, what are some of the consequences? I can sit here and guess, but what are some of the consequences that would happen later in their life about that?
definitely fear of sex altogether, big time. I think just a total fear of it. I think a total unpreparedness for it when it is time to do that, when you are with someone you're going to marry or you are married. That's something that's just like, now it's this huge, scary, unknown territory that you're just not prepared for.
And probably full of shame, right?
Oh, yeah, probably.
Because,
yeah.
okay, I need to do this to be a good wife, but I've been taught my whole life.
Yeah, I've been taught my whole life that it's dirty and it's impure.
So, yeah, that's wild.
And I think it also, if you were taught that and then you didn't follow all those rules, now you feel, well, now I'm impure. Now you feel like, I feel like it kind of takes away from the grace of God as well. Like, now you feel like, oh, there's no hope for me now, or I feel like the way it was taught was like, I remember somebody giving an example of like your used toothbrush.
Oh, wow.
And now you're going to give your husband this used toothbrush, and it's been used however many times. And gosh, and I think they also would sort of say like, now you're not going to be able to have basically as good of a marriage, or maybe it's not going to be as strong when you do get married, which I'm not saying that sleeping around has no effect on your future marriage. I think it definitely can and will in some ways. However, I also think that God is a graceful God, and I also think that he can make a beautiful marriage if both parties are committed to him and to each other, no matter what their past is. So I think it's kind of just that shaming and that feeling of like, oh, well, if I messed up these rules now I'm broken. Now it's never going to work out for me, kind of a thing.
That's why I think a lot of legalism is satanic. I'm not saying the people that propagate it are satanic or that they're trying to be that way, but I think he whips them up into it for the very reason you just said. It's really subtle, but it's powerful, because the true message of the gospel is grace, that we're messed up, but yet God loves us despite that, perfectly loves us despite the fact, not loves us more because we were more pure or whatever else. Mm-hmm. And you just nailed it. Why would Satan want legalism? It's simple. It's because for a fair amount of people, once they believe that they've crossed some line and that they keep crossing that line, they begin to believe maybe they weren't ever really meant to be God's child after all. And then they're just going to say, to heck with it. I've been accused of being this person, and this is what I was told there's some people that are pure and some aren't, which, by the way, is a fat lie. There's not like, Paul would say there's not one good, not one, right?
Yeah.
Nobody. I'm not saying, and you could try to be comparative. Well, that person's a better person than that person, or whatever. But the more you find out about God and Christianity in real life, that's just not true. There's different types of behaviors. But getting off the point is that there's probably been a lot of people from this purity movement and other types of legalisms like this that have pushed people into just saying, well, this is the kind of person I am. I'm going to go into that life. There's been studies done that show that if you treat somebody as a child like they're a thief, that they're more likely, if you call them, oh, you little robber, you little thief, or, the language you use, they just say, well, people already think that of me. I'm just going to become that. And I would imagine there's huge ramifications if you say, oh, you're a dirty, impure person because you thought that guy that walked by was hot, or the girl that walked by was hot, or whatever.
And
right?
frankly, let's admit it, this world does that to us anyways. Like, most of us have negative view of ourselves,
Yeah.
And we don't think that we're very good, and we don't, which is true in our flesh, because we live in this world and we live in our sinful flesh. But once you're in Christ, then we're all new,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. I think the purity culture people, whoever that was, besides, Josh Harris in his book, or whoever he was around, or however that got started, maybe he was just adding to it. I don't know. But I think it's all well intentioned. I think their heart was, seeing this culture that is moving into, dates being just how many bases do we get to, like it's like a given that you're going to sleep with somebody on a first date. It's of course even worse now. Here we are 15, 20 years later, from even that time when that was popular. So I think we should talk about like what do young women do? What do young men do now without going into the legalistic side of it? What's a grace focused way to handle that as a parent advising their child, or as a young adult now who's having to deal with this world and the dating scene that they probably struggle with as a believer?
I think Taylor sort of said one of the things, we have two girls, they're going to be growing up, so we're going to have this conversation, or more specifically, you will, at some point. And one of the things I like that Taylor was saying is changing the focus. Oh man, I forget what you said.
I don't know which time you're talking about.
Dang it, it was earlier.
She said so many brilliant things.
Yeah.
Which brilliant thing do you want me to requote? No, I'm just kidding.
All of it. Can we just restart
true.
the whole thing? Man, now I'm going to lose it. Someone else can go ahead while
That's all right.
rethink
No,
it.
I think it's.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, I think it's interesting you were talking about. Yeah, I think they had good intentions, but I do think it came from a motivation of fear. Mm-hmm. Fear
Right.
that kids were going to get in trouble. Fear that kids were going to get pregnant out of wedlock, and all those things, which I get. I understand. So, did you remember?
I
What you were saying?
remembered.
Go ahead.
It was, you were talking about the purpose of dating.
Yeah.
If the focus on dating is finding a partner, and I know it's really hard when you're a teenager. I was 14. I've ran the gambit of a teenager, and I understand where your mind's at, especially as a guy. But I think if you can instill that guidance of like, when you start dating, the purpose of dating is to find someone that you have a strong connection and compatibility with it, and the benefit of finding that person and having a strong bond that's based on a relationship with Christ, the sex and the physical part can come with it at some point, and that's awesome. And I don't think it needs to be like hey, don't ever do this until you're this, or don't do that. Like, just setting the guidance of like compatibility, God, and then these extra things, gifts get to come with it. And if they're focused on that, I know it's hard as a kid and you have to guide a lot, as a teenager, but you also have to let them make their own mistakes a little bit so you don't push them away. But I like that focus of like, hey, like none of this stuff is evil, or none of it's just wrong. Like, sex isn't just evil and wrong. Like, people, like, that's how I was growing up. Like, oh, that's not good. You shouldn't do that. Like, and it's like, well, hold on. Like, is this all bad?
I think parents tend to want to make a bunch of rules for their kids versus like for every situation and every little detail, instead of wanting to teach their kids how to make wise decisions or teach their kids motivation behind things, consequences of certain things. And it teaches them to make smart decisions instead of just, oh, well, this is the list of rules and I got to follow them. Because that's not how life is, really. Life doesn't always perfectly fit into a list of rules, or you might have forgotten some, or, and so that's kind of something that I try as a parent to keep in focus is, how can I train my kids to think for themselves, to make smart decisions, to seek God, to be wise and how to make decisions themselves versus just trying to follow this list of do's and don'ts.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's a purpose. There's a purpose for, like, why do we not want our teen, girls to end up pregnant?
Exactly.
Like, instead of saying don't get pregnant, if you talk to them about the responsibility and the money and the heartache of not having the man in the life and the beauty of a child, but as a teenager, that would be a lot of trouble. It's going to be a lot of trouble, you know? Or you would have to give the baby up for adoption, and that's painful, So, like, if you talk to your teenager about those kinds of things and those kinds of motivations and the importance of, like, all of it, the diseases that you can get and the heartbreak of being in relationships where you go that far, but you're not really committed. And then, so then there's, sometimes it's multiple people that you're, spending that kind of intimate time with, and you might not, feel valuable at that after doing
just
that.
The heartbreak is going to be, I think, stronger if you have that stronger connection with somebody and then you break up with them. That's going to be a lot tougher on you than if you just dated them for a while without having sex. Like, yeah, it's still going to hurt your heart to break up with them if you end up breaking up. But I think God made sex such a intimate connection with somebody that's a lot harder to break off without it being painful.
People want to act like it's not. And we have, TV and movies and stuff they can progressively keep trying to make the case. And I think this is satanic too. They just try to make the case that sex is just another form of entertainment. It's just another fix for, just wanting a thrill or whatever else. And they'll even go so far as to really go after the idea that it has any kind of intimate spiritual connection to the other person. In fact, but then they'll turn it on themselves. Like, I don't know how, you've probably all seen shows or movies where they'll be in a relationship where, like, oh, they're with a boyfriend and then they sleep with this other guy, and then but it's a culture where that's supposed to be okay, but wait a minute, now they're hurt that they did that or whatever else. They play with it continually in Hollywood or whatever. The truth of the matter is that you can act like open relationships and it doesn't really matter, and people, it's just sex, no big deal or whatever else. But there is some sort of, like, more spiritual connection to it than people want to admit. And so you hit it on the head. So then when that breaks off, it affects you, it affects them, it affects the next person. It's not the dirty toothbrush problem as much as it is just a broken heart problem. And I think that's why, when you think about God and his intentions, he doesn't just set down rules because he's like, I just want to give a bunch of rules that are hard to follow. I want to make everybody have a sex drive so that we can populate the earth, but then I'm going to tell them not to do it. That's kind of like what you feel like sometimes in some churches. Yeah. I don't think that's it. I think God's trying to say, you know what? There's some things that are going to hurt you if you don't follow these rules. Like, because I'm not saying God's a God of just rules. I'm just saying, like, if he's got guidelines because he loves us and he doesn't want to see us get hurt or hurt other people, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the important thing to talk about. Like, is what's the reality of this situation? Like, what should, we live in a culture today in so many ways. So many people are like, this has gone so far. People see so many graphic things and language and blah, blah, blah. And everything's, and I look at it totally the opposite way. I realize that because I look at it from the 50s, 60s, even when we grew up, it was so taboo to talk about these things with your parents. And so you didn't get very good discussions with them. And you kind of laughed and stuff at the pictures at school and the sex education. But nobody's talked about the stuff they should have talked about to say, you know what? what you just said, to sit there and to say, you know what? Hey, I think kids are a lot smarter and they're a lot more thick-skinned and they can handle really real conversations now. Not kids, but young adults. I don't want to talk about a 6-year-old with this or something, but but if somebody has if somebody's going through puberty at that point, there you need to start talking to them about these things. But you can talk to them. They probably know more than you think they know already. But you can talk to them about the things that matter. You can, and I would say you put it very matter-of-factly. It's not because before, I think for centuries it's been like, oh, don't you talk about sex, blah 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 blah. But now it can be like, you know what? Here's the deal. If you go out and sleep around with people, you're going to start feeling like you're a tramp, and you like you just said, you're going to get a bunch of potentially have like debilitating diseases, maybe even deadly diseases, but you can have a disease of the heart. You're not going to be able to connect to people. You're going to have a problem actually staying committed in marriages or in any kind of relationship.
Yeah, because when you do that, when you have a lot of boyfriends, you're practicing divorce, right? Because you're practicing getting into a relationship, but then leaving a relationship, getting into another relationship and leaving that relationship. That's what you're practicing.
That's exactly
right.
And I think we just be real with people, and we need to be more real too about, instead of just going with cultural norms, we tell women these confusing situations, be pure, but also don't get married. So be pure, don't have sex outside of marriage, but hey, go get your career and don't get married till you're 30. So just suppress those sexual urges for like 12, 15 years.
Yeah.
But, don't do anything about it. Like, that's a mixed message. I think we need to have a culture where people say, what's wrong with marriage?
Yeah.
Nothing. So this whole thing, well, you got to live your life as though when you get married, it's such a pathetic view of it that, well, you don't want to settle down and get married, then your life's over, kind of a thing. What a terrible idea to tell somebody that.
Yeah, our culture has a pretty bad view of marriage.
And we live in a time where you can get daycare, you can both have careers if you want to. People are doing where we live, people do that all the time. Maybe it's not the best answer. I don't know. You need to find the right answer for you. No, I'm getting way off the subject of purity.
Yeah, now we have kids.
But it's just, to me, I just think, you know what? And again, send your kids away if they're listening to this right now, because I just want to just be able to have frank conversations. Sure. But there are strong. Let's get down to the brass tacks. You guys push back on me on this. God gave. Now, there's situations where people don't have strong sexual desires. Don't get me wrong. And there's all sorts of reasons why. Some of it's included in what we're talking about today. Maybe they were just kind of taught to feel bad about it or something. But in a very healthy situation, that they haven't had those kinds of situations, they weren't abused, that kind of stuff. The sexual desire is very strong, and we joke about it only being in men. That's not true. That's absolutely not true. It's strong in men and women. Okay, and we need to be able to talk openly about it, because people are dealing with that, and they need to understand. I wish somebody would have told me as a child. I wish my parents could have sat down and been real with me about it, but it wasn't a culture where they did. I'm not blaming my parents. Nobody was doing this. But here would have been a real conversation. Hey, you know what, Philip? You're getting pretty close with Laurel. You guys have been together for a long time. And when you get alone, the urges that you're going to have are going to be so strong that if you don't kind of think through it ahead of time, you're going to succumb to that. And you might not think you're going to, but you probably should make a plan. Not, you better make a plan because I don't want to see you getting, pregnant outside of, not that, no. Just to say, look, if you want, like someone said in here, like if you want to say, hey, I don't really want to do that before we're married. I think God doesn't want me to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. Then why not have a frank conversation with that person and say, you have no idea the power that will overcome you in that moment. So have a plan. And instead of like always have a chaperone, maybe say the same thing in a different way. Like, probably don't set yourself up for situations where you're going to be alone a lot, because it's going to be almost impossible for you to resist doing that. But then give them the other thing. But if you do, make sure and have the proper protection. Make sure that you do some things that you don't end up hurting yourself in a really bad way. Like, I think those would have been things, oh my gosh, we can never talk about that. That would be way too graphic. You can't talk about that. I wish somebody would have talked to me about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because let's be honest. Even the most strict parents that had the most strict rules, did that keep all of their kids from doing it anyway?
No.
I think it's the exact opposite. I think that typically the parents that have the strictest rules will find at some point their children rebel the most.
I think that's
I was like that. You see that all the time in churches, and people can be like, oh, that's not true, or that's just whatever. But it's like, it's true. It really is true. And I like what you're saying. I think people would maybe hear that and be like, oh, telling them to use protection, that's basically like saying it's okay to sin if you're being smart. And it's like, no, like, you're telling them that if something was to happen, this is how you be safe about it, right?
Right.
It's like anything, like, oh, hey, if you see someone with a gun saying to get in the car, don't get in there with it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's a horrible example, but you're just like prepping them, even though it might not be something they need to hear. Maybe they're not sexually active yet, but giving them the preparation for it, whether if it's a situation they'll be in or not, or whether they should do that or not, that's between them and God and you guiding them. But
I know it's stupid. It's like there's this line on the ground, and you watch throughout history, 99 out of 100 people cross over the line. And then you tell your kids, don't you dare cross over that line. You're not going to be one of those ones. 99% of the people are going to do it. So maybe we should probably prepare people so that when they start to cross the line, they know what they're getting into, you know?
Yeah, they know the consequences. They know how to be safe, yeah.
And they might stop. They might not do it because of what you're saying. Because instead of saying, don't do it, that's what's so beautiful about living in the new covenant, right? Versus the old covenant. Mm-hmm. Because I think God set up the law for a purpose. I think it was to show us that we couldn't keep it. Mm-hmm. We should learn from that as parents and societies, right? We didn't. We don't learn from that. We think if I just set down the law, you know, yeah. Here's a good example. Let's put a sign. I got a brilliant idea. Let's put a sign on the freeway that tells you the maximum speed limit you can go. And people, that'll stop it. People won't speed.
That's brilliant. Why haven't they done that?
I mean, that's all you gotta do. Just lay down the law, right?
Mm-hmm. Or
that's the way we act like with sex. Like, as long as I tell them and threaten them and all that stuff, it's like, yeah, like your kid's gonna defy what almost no one's been able to do in history of mankind.
Or better yet, give them write 10 commandments on a stone tablet.
Yeah,
and
that'll do it.
They'll never worship any other god or do anything.
I mean, to this day, it's super, super popular for people to Christians to say, we need to make sure and put the 10 commandments up in schools. And it's like, no, we need to make sure that people understand the heart of God, not the rules. Because when you understand the heart, and I think that's what you guys were saying as far as parenting goes, if you understand the heart, thou shalt not kill isn't because, well, that's just a rule. I mean, that's probably an extreme one. Most people don't want to kill people. But, you know, adultery is in there. That's kind of what we're talking about here a little bit, right? It's not because it's like, well, God just wants to tell you not to do something so that you can, you know, don't look at that pink elephant in the corner of the room, you know. And you're like, oh, that what? There's a pink elephant over there? It's the reason God said don't commit adultery is because it's going to kill your family, your spouse. You know, it's almost worse than murder, right? Because you got to live through that. Yeah. So you've committed adultery now you've ruined, you know, your relationship with that person, and it's going to break down them. If you have kids, it's going to go to them. Almost, I mean, most marriages don't survive that, and God doesn't want to see that kind of pain and suffering in a marriage, right? It wasn't just, well, I've got a rule and you shouldn't cross it. I mean, I'm not speaking for God, but what I love about God is that He loves people and He wants people to love each other, you know.
Yeah, and I think that love, like, can be a real good conversation thread. So when you're talking to your children about, or your teenagers about this subject, is that if like love and like lifelong love, that where you have a spouse and you're going to go all the way to the end till death do us part in that, like the best relationships are built on really good friendships. And so you want to build that kind of a relationship for sure and have that. And the idea of having sex outside of marriage, there's so many things where love can be used as part of that conversation. For example, if you do get pregnant, then is it loving for that child to grow up in a family that might not have a father in the family or might be adopted? I mean, obviously I'm pro-adoption. We've actually adopted a child ourselves and we're so thankful for her. But the point is that going through that process is kind of tough, and it's not loving for either of the two participants in it too, because like we have talked about, like there's going to be heartache, there's going to be emotional stuff, there's going to be a lot of stress and a lot of pain in those things when there's breakups or when there's this or that. So talking about when we respect others and when we love others, to be able to like appreciate, like young men understand that, to love that other person is to respect her and to, not take advantage of her and not to push her into something that she's not ready to do. Or if she wants to keep herself for marriage, then respect that, and that's the loving thing to do. And for the girls, it's loving to, make sure that you protect yourself, but it's also loving to have a conversation with your boyfriend and you guys talk about it and be open about it. And don't just leave it in this kind of giggly, snickery, kind of, we're not going to really talk about it kind of thing. I think open communication is good between people. And if you encourage your teen and young adult to do those things and to think about the consequences and all of the avenues of the consequences of what that could be, then that, I think that would help in that conversation, because that's not about rules. It's about reasons,
Yeah.
the motive.
Because let's face it, sex isn't bad. It's good in the right context. And that's, I think that's what we're saying.
Right.
We started off with this purity. Well, sex is bad. You got to be pure, But and also this only date for the sake of marriage. And we could try to make the case of what they said and stuff like that. But at some point, I just want to puke over all this, because I'm like, you know what? We're just getting so utilitarian about what it is to be a Christian. Here, God created all this wonderful, beautiful stuff. Sex is a part of that, and all sorts of things, not just sex, but all sorts of wonderful things, kissing and dating and holding hands and all these wonderful things. And you have to practice part of growing up is practicing. You do a little bit of, you look at kids, they are practicing those relationships and those friendships and those and stuff, and there's not, I don't know. Life is fun. Yeah. Didn't you have butterflies and fun when you had the first time somebody held your hand, or you thought someone was like, why would we want to take that away from people?
Yeah.
So if we could just be honest and teach them context and say, you know what? The whole idea is that to have the best relationship, you're going to have the most fun, you're going to have the most enriching life if you don't feel like you've destroyed people's hearts and stuff like that. You might think that that's funny, but it's not, or it's fun, or it's normal. That's the thing. We need to denormalize what's normal. We act, and I'm just going to say some really hard things here. And I know some of this is changing, but it isn't in some cultures, so I'm just going to say it straight up. It's not the woman's fault if she looks pretty or wears something you think was revealing or whatever else. Guys, that is not an excuse. You're just as responsible as she is. And she's not, I know women too well to know that they're not trying. I mean, there are women that are trying to get sex. Don't get me wrong. There's a whole gamut out there, right? But some women just want to look cute. And they're not trying to invite you. You're never invited to take advantage of a woman unless it's consensual. You're never invited to that. And don't you dare, men or women do it too now, but mostly men have done this in culture. Don't you dare say that you don't love me unless you have sex with me. That is basically spiritual rape of that person's mind. Do not do that. You are forcing something on them that you should never, ever do. And I will say that is impure, and you're a rotten person. You should not do that. And you will live with that rottenness. And you'll think, oh, but I had sex with that person because I convinced them, and then you'll leave them and drop them. That's just ridiculous. I just think it's time to just call a spade a spade. Women are people just like men. They burp and fart and do all the other stuff that they do. We need to stop this stupid thing about they're different. I'm not saying everybody's the same. But we need to grow up as a society and realize that we're talking about human beings. They're not lesser human beings. They're not, they're pretty objectified figures and that kind of stuff. I think most women don't think that way anymore anyway. But I just think, you know what? It's just goofy. We need to just get real about this stuff. And the good news is I think a lot of the newer, younger cultures are way ahead of what we're talking about here today. I think they are probably already more real. They're probably talking about it a lot more than we even talk about it. And I think in some, at least healthy situations, I think a lot of women are just saying, hey, I'll go out with you, but you're not doing that with me.
Yeah.
But I think the movies and TV would make it out to see, I mean, I'm getting so sick of this scene. it's like, oh, we met somebody and we liked them, we walked around the park. Now we go home in the apartment and slam each other up against the wall and then rip each other's clothes off. It's like, I get that sounds good, and and it's and all that other stuff,
Makes
and
good
maybe
TV,
that
I
is
guess.
actually happening in a lot of cultures or whatever else. But that's obnoxious. We don't have to. Oh well, that's where we're at in a culture. If that's what you think, that's just obnoxious. Take your time. You don't have to have sex with someone. You can
Day
at least
one.
wait till the next day.
I like what Laurel said about, like, you mentioned, like, being a friend and having an open discussion, because, yeah, if you get it out, I mean, I'll be honest, I did that while growing up. Like, it was an open discussion, and it wasn't like, oh, we're gonna have sex tomorrow, let's schedule it. It was like, maybe there's certain things that we are comfortable doing now, and maybe there's some things we should wait longer towards. And, once we started to commit to each other before God, it was a little bit more like relaxed with things. And that's kind of where I wanted to go with this next topic, is what's considered marriage in God's eyes?
Yeah, we really like to just pull it out on the table.
Yeah. Is it a signed, notarized?
If you don't mind, that was a really bad phrase. I didn't mean it like that. We don't want to pull it out.
Oh my gosh, that's so good.
No, that's a great question, and I don't think there's an easy answer to that, right? I don't think we're here to say, oh, it doesn't, it's just as long as you've made a commitment for God,
Sure.
then you're married. I don't know that it's putting a ring on someone's finger. I don't know that it's going to a church and having that. It's a great question.
The fact of the matter is, we live in America, and in America, to be married, you have to be legally married, and there are certain things around that. And God does ask us to obey the laws of the land, So that's part of it as far as the law is concerned, But does that mean that somebody can't a couple can't commit themselves to each other before they can have that written piece of paper? I think that can happen.
So it's an interesting proposition. So you're going with the Romans 13:14 kind of a situation where we're to, obey, but God would want us to obey the laws of the land. But the laws of the land don't say you have to be married, or you have to be married before you have sex, or that kind of stuff. So,
I did say that doesn't mean that you can't, spiritually, be married.
I know you did say
before,
that.
yeah.
I'm just saying I don't even know that. You're right. So legally, to get tax advantages and other kinds of legal status as a married person, but the question being, what does God consider a legal marriage?
Yeah, because some people don't
know
ever
that He
get
would say,
the
well,
actual.
it depends on where you live and what the laws are. I personally would say I don't think God.
I don't think so either. I wasn't saying that.
Yeah.
I just was saying, and I'm not saying that two people can't live together and never actually legally get married and not be like a married couple,
Sure.
For
But it is
30 years.
And that's why it's a hard question to answer. It's kind of like when someone says, well, what's alive and what's dead? And then it's like, oh, that's easy. And then the scientists spend 20, 30 years trying to define that. It's actually kind of hard to define what is a marriage in God's eyes. It's a great question.
Oh, I know. That's why I asked it.
So she gave room that the idea that there is a spiritual version of that has nothing to do with the marriage license, which I would think we all probably agree that's the marriage license is really just a technicality for the state itself, not.
Yeah, I think there's elements. Yeah, and I can't speak for God to say what He believes is a marriage, but I think, in my opinion, some elements of that would be you both committing to each other for life and meaning it. You both making that promise in front of God and including God in your marriage. And I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm on the same boat as you, and I think to get to that, again, I'm not trying to put like, oh, after 5 weeks it's okay, or after 3 days, or after 20 years. Like it's a spectrum. Who knows how long it'll actually take? But I do think, going back to that thing earlier that you mentioned too, like, you need to be friends with the person. You need to trust the person. You need to have God. Both of you need to have be born again, I believe. Like, you both need God. If one person doesn't have God and you have God, you guys are talking totally different wavelengths here when you're talking about, like, hey, I don't want to do this, I want to do that, or this is what my thoughts are on how we should raise our child if they're going, if one person believes you should be talking about Jesus and the other one thinks you shouldn't, that's probably, you shouldn't bring a child into that household. Then probably it's going to be very confusing, and who knows what's going to happen with their soul now for eternity, because you made it complicated in the situation. But I think that if you guys are both friends, you have a relationship, both of you with God, equally yoked. It could be 5 weeks, it could be a year, it could be 10 years. That's between you and that person and God. And I think that you guys should just feel it out. Literally, I'm just kidding. Physically feel. No, I think you should feel it out. And I don't think anyone can make rules. And I think it's kind of, I don't know, I think it's kind of funny for people to like, you have to wait until marriage. And if you can't get married with the state, then you just shouldn't be having sex yet. It's like, why? Like, does the state, does God really look at the notarized document with 2 witnesses from the church in Vegas and say, gosh, they got hitched, or you're good now, you're pure if you have sex? But that's what I needed, was that you know.
So let's just try to define it a little bit. Let's just get
Sure.
down to it a little bit instead of the willy nilly, because it's hard.
Sure.
So let's say yes and no kinds of things. So does sex itself, since we started off with that topic, does it have anything to do with defining whether you're married or not?
I would say I think it does in God's eyes. Yeah.
Meaning what?
Meaning that unless you consummate the marriage, I don't think you're married in God's eyes, because I think that's part of the joining together to become one flesh, like he talks
Okay.
about. I think that's the,
So roommate buddies never have sex. They're probably not married.
in my
So
opinion.
that makes sense. I'm thinking the other side though. So as soon as you have sex with someone, are you married to them?
I don't, in my opinion, no, if you're not committed to each other and God and promising each other that you're going to stay with each other.
And I like keep that answer there, because I think that's the next question I'd like to ask. But anybody have any different opinions about sex, either before or after what we're going to define as marriage? Does it define the marriage?
I would agree with Taylor so far on what you said.
It's interesting with what you said, because I was kind of meaning before, but it's interesting you went to after. It's fascinating to me. It's kind of like saying, is baptism required to be saved? Right? It's sort of in that same result.
Kind of.
Like it's sort of it's a natural next thing you would want to do once you're saved, because you want to pronounce it to the rest of the world. I think it's the same thing with the consummation. Is it's like, yeah, that's sort of like one of the first results of that or whatever. But I don't know that I don't know. It's interesting. I kind of get what you're saying with that though,
I kinda
because I
think
do
of it-
think there's a spiritual bond there.
Yeah,
so
I guess I kind
yeah.
of think of it different than baptism, because I feel like baptism is, I'd compare baptism more to like the wedding ring. It's more of just a symbol of, it doesn't make you saved to
That's
get
a good point.
baptized.
That's a
The
good
ring
point.
doesn't make you married, but it's an outward symbol to show everyone else, hey, I made this commitment.
Right.
However, I think the consummating the marriage, because I believe that God made it a lot deeper than a lot of people want to make it
Yeah.
make it sound, is
I
like,
love where you're going
I
with
think
that.
God created that as a way, one of the ways, because I don't think it's the only way we connect with our spouse, but I think it's one of the ways that we actually start to become one with that person, like he said we would become one flesh.
That's awesome. I love what you're
So-
going with that. And I think there is I think it is like, I think a intimate spirit, sexual intimacy is that sort of like right on the edge of between spirit and flesh. Like, I think it is a spiritual experience. And people say, no, remember sex is dirty. It's like, I think you got to listen to the first part of this podcast. We've told you, no. It's a spiritual experience, it's like this boundary between spiritual and physical. And I think you're right. And it's what binds us together. And I think the more we push into science and quantum and stuff, we're going to realize that entanglement probably happens during that part.
Sure.
And I think, so it kind of gets, go ahead. If anybody has more on that.
I was going to say, and sorry if I missed something, but are you saying that, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Are you saying that you don't believe that you're married in God's eyes until you've had sex?
Yeah, I was saying that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
See,
in my
I
opinion.
disagree with that. I would say that
So you and me are married?
yeah, we disagree now. We're getting into divorce. No, I would say that the marriage is it's like the covenant that you're making with a person before God. He's the witness, and the sex is a symbolism to show that covenant physically.
I think it's, yeah, in my opinion, I think those are included. But I think that's, yeah. That's just my
I don't think
opinion.
you need to be
I think it
baptized
needs
to be saved, just like you don't need to have sex to be married.
But it's interesting. I think that's what I was saying to her, and I think she convinced me. I'm kind of flipping to the other side and saying, I think after her description of it, I think I believe more that it is actually it's like the act. It's part of the act of actually the consummation is actually the putting together of the two people in a deeper way than just being friends or going to the chapel or doing that other stuff. It's not, it's
I agree, but that's not what the flip side is. It's not you just going to chapel and you're like, oh, we're getting married, and then there's sex and now you're married. It's the pre-sex covenant commitment to each other and to God. That is what I'm saying.
No, I definitely think that's super important as well. I don't think it's a marriage without that part either. I think that's, in my opinion, it's both of those things. So I also don't think you're married to everyone you have sex with either.
Yeah, but see, and yet I think that's why I'm kind of siding with where you went with that, because I think there is a little bit of an element to that, and that's why having a bunch of sex partners is so damaging to so many people. They might think it's cool and they go, oh man, I'm doing all this stuff and everything else, but actually what you're doing, I think God did make it something special for people who are married. And I think you are, in a way, sort of experiencing a marital thing with them,
like a bond, that kind of bond.
I agree.
And you see it all the time. Even the movies know. Even the writers of movies and television know that, because they portray that sort of like that person that wants to sneak off in the morning, and then there's always the other person who's like, "What? You leaving so soon?" And it's like, and it's portrayed as like this. Oh, I don't want it to be anything. Because they started to feel a little bit of something there.
Not only that, but they also portray the fact that, because those two have slept with each other now, back on episode 2, like you always see that they have some sort of bond, and it's really hard for them to move on. And
so there is, I think both are true. So, so let's get to the dedication part, or I forget what you said.
The commitment.
Commitment. So I'll ask question number 2. Is we're trying to define what marriage is before God. We keep saying, you used a different word than commitment. You said covenant. But what is that covenant? What are we really saying to God and to each other? What is that commitment?
I think it's that I'm going to support this woman or this man, if you're a woman. I'm going to support this person in their endeavors in life. And whatever purpose God has for their life, I'm going to be there to lift them up and help them through it. And I expect them to do the same for me. And if we have a child, together we're going to guide this child to be the most that they can be, and serve God's purpose.
I like all that.
And that doesn't mean obey and be the perfect child and never I don't mean like that. I like serving God, loving Him, loving others, following the true commandment that's so important.
I like all that. Mm-hmm. And but there's some limit, right? Like as long as, or
till death.
If yeah. Well, I guess that's what I'm driving at. Is I like what you're saying, this commitment, but I guess I'll just answer it and see what you guys think. I think that commitment is nothing short of forever. And we can talk about the afterlife. I don't mean that, but till death do us part, at least. I'm saying I don't think that I do not think that there is a marriage unless both partners mean to say this is forever till death do us part. I'm not saying it will last forever. But if in your mind you're like trying it out, or it sounds like a good idea, or it's convenient, or I should do the right thing because she's pregnant, or all the other reasons. If it's not, I am gonna do everything in my being to make sure that I never leave this person, and not just leave them like divorce, but I'm going to be by their side, even if they hate me, even if they're going through something. That's why I love those old vows about the sickness and health and all the other stuff. Like, I'm saying it doesn't matter. I'm saying it's unconditional now. It may have started conditional. Oh, I like this kind of person, and I'm not sure that I like them, so I'm not going to be with them. By the time you get to marriage, that's why I think there is a process there.
Yeah.
You should get to the point where you jump off that cliff, jump into the deep, and say, I will never leave this person, because that's what Jesus did for us. He says, I know what you're going to end up doing 10 years from now. I love you, and I will love you then, and I will love you always. And I think that, to me, is the commitment we're making for God, is that I'm not leaving.
Do you think that it's, because I know a lot of shows anyways, I don't know a lot of people, but I know a lot of shows that say, where people are asking, how do you know when you're in love, And all I know is my own experience. and we were young, but it's not just that I was willing to commit forever, but I was wanting to commit forever. You know, not just willing, but like my desire was like, I just want to be with this person forever. Like I'm so excited and I want to be there to support them, and I want him, and I want to, you know, like I want to partner with this person forever.
It's almost cliche. Like, I couldn't imagine life without you.
Yeah.
Which is really funny, but it's true when you have true love. And I think everybody's looking for it. And I know people are like, oh, I just like sleeping around and having fun. Sure, you might. Don't get me wrong. Like, I understand the appeal of wanting to sleep around. I get it. But I don't know a single person personally that at some point, whether having gone through years of doing that or not, at some point in their life is like, man, I feel lonely and I wish I had somebody. Because they're seeking that love, true love. And you're right, they fill it with it could be drugs, it could be sex, it could be money, whatever it is. They fill it with this garbage. But, you know,
it
I don't
doesn't
know.
really fill them.
It doesn't. It's temporary.
In fact, it kind of makes the wound worse after a while. They just get more lonely and more depressed and more. Yeah, it's weird. The cheap substitutes for love leave you wanting more. It's like when they do a cheap job of filling in a pothole, and then the next year it's a bigger one. I just feel like that's the way that kind of stuff is. But yeah,
but I think if you fill that, and it's going to sound super. If you fill that hole with God,
yeah.
And I believe if you fill that hole with God and you're seeking him and have him in your life and you're looking for someone to be with, that he could put that person in your life.
Oh, sure.
But he doesn't always. That might not be what he has for you, but you don't need to be filling that gap of not having that person because you feel empty, because you should be filling it with God. Yeah. And I think people are always trying to fill that hole, but if you fill it with God, it covers every little crack and every little crevice. And if you're wanting something, I want a wife, I want that house, I want this, I really want a better job. You can work towards those, you can get those, you can try your best, but you should be putting God first. And I do think that he will guide that path. That's how it was with Taylor and I and Sarah, like, and you two, like, you hear these stories and you see these people that are married for a long time and have great marriages, and not a lot of Christian marriages end in divorce too, but you see the ones that are really putting like God first on equally, the man and the woman, and lifting their children up, and they're fostering a loving household, and they're going through the tough times together, the lack of money and the lack of health and the lack of this, and they're fulfilled. And even when their children die or their spouse dies, when you let that hole now get filled up with something else, the drugs, sex, something else, you're going to fall into that pit. But if you fill those gaps now with God, I know it sounds cliche, like just fill everything with God, but it's true. It's changed my life. It's changed my life with Sarah, with you, but it also changed my life the night Sarah died. Like, God totally answered my prayer that night, and it was miraculous. And I think that's true, and people should realize that that's really what everything comes down to. And then once you have God, you can branch out and really live. But, you know, I could just rant for days about how great God is. Sorry.
No, amen to that.
Amen.
And that's who we're really married to for eternity, right? So
Yeah. Bride of Christ.
and that's kind of goes with our definition. That should always be forever.
Yep.
And there's not. I just think commitment is. It's easy to say. I think it's really hard to do. And I would say if somebody's 16, 18, like, we fell in love really young, so I'm a hypocrite for saying this, I guess, but if someone's really young and it's just feeling great, and I listened to this podcast, they said, as long as I felt like I want to be with that person forever, then we're basically destined to be married. But give it a little time, like, not till you're 30. I'm not again, like, I'm not saying that.
Well, the thing is, we met at 14, but we didn't marry until we were 21. So we were really, really great best friends when we got married.
Because it's true. I hate to say it. I think life is thrilling and amazing and romantic and stuff like that, but it's also a lot of not that. And I think if all you've ever experienced so far with whoever you're with is that, you got to wait for that to have some times where it's not that, because, let's talk about cliche.
Yeah, people show their true colors.
When that kind of fades away, that sort of, what do they call that?
The honeymoon phase.
Honeymoon phase, and it's not just for marriages. It's when you're dating somebody or whatever. It's everything's great, and it does. It just got rose-colored glasses, right? Like everything's just they just really excite me here. That's why so many people, I think, even get involved in extramarital affairs, because they're like, that person met them for lunch and they're so exciting and everything else, but they're not the ones that have to be there every day and raise the kids and pay the bills and it's not fair, right? But then what happens in so many times when it happens? They leave their spouse, they go to that person, they become that person.
Yeah.
And then they're bored with them.
I mean,
That's
think
just the
about
thing. When you, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay.
When you're a teenager and you don't have all that responsibility of an adult, you don't have kids yet, you have a lot more time and resources to do all those fun things with your person that you're dating. And yeah, so I think that adds to the kind of honeymoon phase, even like you said, even when you're dating, it's like, oh, it's all fun. It's all going on fun dates and eating good food and hanging out all day and doing stuff and kissing and what. And then when you get married and you're older, you have a job, you have responsibilities, maybe you have kids, all of that takes so much more time and energy. And not that it's not still amazing, it's just amazing in a different way. Yeah. And it's amazing in a way where you may not be doing those kinds of exciting, fun things as often. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be able to have that commitment to each other, even on a super mundane, boring day where all you did was on a Monday, when, you both worked 8 hours and you had to come home and do chores and you're too exhausted to have sex that night and you know what I'm saying? There's going to be those days where it's just life, everyday life. Mm-hmm. And that's okay because you're still there with each other through it. And that's what makes it so great is even though it's not that honeymoon phase, it's still, that when you wake up in the morning after that mundane day, they're still going to be there next to you.
So what I'm hearing is, we need to make a checklist of when it's okay to have sex. What I'm hearing is if you guys can do your taxes together and not divorce or break up, then I think you guys are set. Dude, I'm telling you, taxes.
If you guys can get through having an infant, having a sick kid, being sick yourself, having money problems, and a leaky roof all at the same time when taxes are due,
then you can have sex.
Then you're good to go.
The kid isn't yours, though. The kid.
So it gets back to my point. It's funny because it totally gets back to my point. Commitment. So we're talking about all this stuff, but as I'm hearing us all talk, I'm realizing you don't know that stuff until you do get married.
That's right.
Like you're saying. So I'm just saying, like, commitment means that. So I'm kind of backtracking. You can't try out someone long enough to know what it's going to be like when you get to those points. So just mean it when you commit.
Yeah.
Commitments, it's one of those things where like, but it's so different than it was now. So what? That person needs you still. You still need them. And I think, it's funny, you look at cultures where they have arranged marriages and you think, how does that ever work? And they do work.
Because it's commitment.
Because they don't have any choice in those cultures. And so they make it work. You shouldn't have a choice either. If you marry somebody, there's no more choice. The D word's off the table. It's that's just it's so disheartening for me to think that there's such a high divorce rate when it's just as simple as saying like, okay, we're having a tough time. Let's get some help. Let's get through this. That's why we're together. It gets to what you guys said about being friends. You want to be with that person, not because you want all the popcorn and kissing and stuff like we talked about. That's great. I'm not against that stuff, but because you care about them. It gets back to God's heart again because you love them, right? And that's what draws us to God. He loves us and we want to be with him and he wants to be with us. It's the same with those people, but it's going to get real like we're talking about here. And that's okay, but just don't leave. I think we just need to tell ourselves, like, dare ourselves to be stable, dare ourselves to be committed, I just think we live in a culture that's still so flighty. It's just, I don't know why. I just get super irritated by the,
I think, we started this podcast talking about the purity culture, and I think we can look at our modern culture and feel like it's gone totally the opposite way, which, not everybody's a Christian out there, and they're living in this, like, kind of totally free, totally open, like, thing that they're, culture, the dating culture. Now, I'm not dating age, so I don't have friends that are dating age. I don't, we've been married, and you guys all our kids are married except our youngest one. And so, like, it seems to me like those are kind of the two extremes, and to find the balance, the middle of the godly road is insert grace, insert love, insert commitment, insert friendship, like insert communication.
That's big.
Yeah, that's the biggest one I'd say.
Yeah. So
Be real. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's communication, I guess, in a different way. But yeah, I agree with you. Just get real and stop playing games, with all these dumb little concepts, and just get real, because life's real. And, and grace covers the fact that life's real. We're not, when we say those things, we're not saying just go off and do whatever, and it doesn't matter, and God just wants you to do whatever. And that's not what we're saying. That's silly. But what we're saying is do your best, try your best, but stop with the whole, I've got to, kind of getting back to the beginning of the conversation.
Like
It's
I have a list of rules to make sure I follow.
Right. I think that whole purity culture was about just making people just nervous and frustrated, and that's not going to make for anything good. Go out and live life to the fullest, but put your brain on too, and part of that's I'll get off on a whole nother topic we should do on the table sometime, but part of that's just knowing your limits on inebriation and things like that. It's, you got to understand, and I'm not against drinking or drugs or whatever, that's up to you and God, but do understand that some of those things, a lot of those things do kind of take away your ability to make rational thoughts. And so, of course, there's going to be a worldly, fleshly influence to make you do that to the point where you lose your inhibition and do things that you're going to regret. So again, just use your head, learn your limits, get somebody to help you. Say, hey, if I start going too far, don't let me wander off. So whatever, just be real.
Chaperone me.
Yeah, I don't want a chaperone unless it looks like I need one, and then come rescue me. Whatever, I don't know. I'm not saying it right, but I just think just be real, man. Just have fun. Push the limits on the whole thing, but don't be stupid. I guess
Yeah, because I feel like you're saying have fun and live life. Yeah, I feel like a lot of that purity culture stuff sucked all the emotion and life out of getting to know someone. Like God, like you said at the beginning of this, I think sometime was like God gave us that attraction feeling for a reason.
Yeah.
And because he wanted us to find someone to spend our life with, because it's amazing and beautiful when you do. But yeah, if you put so many rules and restrictions on yourself where you're not even able to feel anymore, you're not even able to touch your person you're dating's hand, because that might lead to sex. Oh no.
Yeah.
Then that's just taking all the emotion and fun and life out of it.
So grab their hand, skip through the circus, have the popcorn, and skip the sex if you're not really committed yet for that, and and understand and talk to each other about it and do those things, right? The brilliant person, I don't even remember who it was that said this, but I love this statement, is that they said, sex is kind of like fire. They said, put it in the fireplace in your home. It's warm, it's inviting, it's interesting. It can even be crackling and hot and, pops and all that kind of stuff, right? And, but take that same fire and just put it right out in the middle of the living room, and it burns stuff down, And I think that's kind of what we're getting at, is that whether it's sex or any of these things we're talking about, context matters. And just, the results of what you do is true of any kind of thing, whether or not it becomes, whether it's sin or not, has a lot to do with whether or not what the context was, right?
And how destructive it is.
And if it is sin and it's in the wrong context, well, there's going to be a lot of hurt and a lot of destruction. But it doesn't mean that whatever that was bad. Sex, alcohol, whatever it isn't. We can say, oh, this is bad, and this is bad, and this is bad. It's like, it all depends. It depends on your heart, your situation, that kind of stuff. And just be smart about it. But God made us to enjoy life. We'd have life and life more abundantly. So,
And the flip side of that is you're still going to make mistakes in your life. And when you do, though, it doesn't mean you're ruined forever. It doesn't mean God can't forgive you or won't forgive you. It doesn't mean that now that's it for you. We have such a loving, gracious God, and he wants to forgive you. He wants to give you another chance the next time. And don't just think, oh, now I just got to count myself out. Like, I'm never going to be good enough now. I'm never going to be good enough for God or good enough for a husband or wife or whatever. Like, no, God is
Amen. I like that you said
redemptive
that.
and
Finish the race.
graceful and loving and merciful and just run
So
to
if
him.
that fire burns it all down, I love where you're going with that. That's still not the end with God.
Yeah.
Because he says in Isaiah 61, I will make beauty out of those ashes. I mean, you're exactly right. And that's exactly right. So it's never too late for God. Because guess what? Talk about a marriage. God said, I'm committed to you and I will never leave you nor forsake you. Nothing can separate the love that I have from you, not height nor depth, not, angels, not principalities. None of those things, not even me. I can't even do something that can separate myself from the love of God. So talk about a loving, dedicated relationship in marriage. He set the ultimate model. So, and I love that. He's not going to let you go. So that can keep you confident, huh?
Yeah.
To go out and try stuff, but just don't just try anything because someone dared you to do it. But go out and try to live. I shouldn't say don't try stuff. That sounds terrible. Go out and live life.
I dare you.
Yeah, yeah. And peer pressure be damned. Do stuff because it's what you want and how you think God wants for you, and just enjoy your life.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you, guys. Good discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing it to the table.
Talk to y'all next time.